what we're also finding is the diagnosis used to be very biased towards boys and men. You know, if you think of TV series, The Good Doctor, Young Sheldon, we have this stereotype which is very limited, very limited. In fact, that's a very small portion. But the diagnosis used to only work with picking up a particular presentation of ADHD, for example. ADHD being hyperactive and the naughty boy in class, that's a stereotype. But now the diagnosis is more gender neutral, and we know that girls present and women present differently. Billie Eilish has Tourette's syndrome, which she talks about openly. So she can sing beautifully without these sound bites coming out, but when she's in an interview, she might have a tick or say words involuntarily. So that's another form. We find more people like Richard Branson talking about his dyslexia being a superpower, because you don't rely on text, you rely on visual thinking. And in fact, there's about 40% of entrepreneurs are ADHD, because you can see systems, joins dots, you're inspired by higher risk propensity, creativity, flexibility are natural strengths of that profile of brain. So as more people talk about it, as the diagnosis gets better, and really I know in the autism space they always say if you've met somebody with autism, you met one person with autism, because every case is different. Why do we have written tests if your population may be dyslexic? And is writing really important for that job? Because given our computers these days, I spell terribly, but it always autocorrects. Not always right, but at least you check autocorrect, right? So are we missing out on talent? And if we really want to bring in to particular disciplines, then we need to check that we're not missing people because of just using old styled recruitment and attraction.
I'm Dr. Mandaj Flaro, and on today's episode of the SuperLead podcast series, we are joined by Dr. Sarah Babb, an entrepreneur, an academic, and a business leader, transforming workplace cultures through belonging, inclusive leadership, and neurodiversity coaching. She's a founder and managing director of stimm, an organization on a mission to supercharge neuroinclusive workplaces and empower neurodivergent talent to thrive. And today we unpack her inspiring work on neuroinclusion and future fit leadership. Dr. Sarah, welcome to SuperLead podcast.
Thank you.
Lovely. So I'm excited for our conversation today, largely because we're going to talk about leadership and neurodiversity. But before we get into all that, I would like first to just kind of hear who Dr. Sarah is. And on this podcast, because we've got time, we like to start as early as possible. And if you can take us from sort of growing up days and to where you are today and the work that you do, not only at Gibbs, but in your own organization.
That would take us back a long way. So let me rather shortcut the story a little bit. I think, although I think it would be valid to mention that I think my awakening around leadership and building inclusive societies and communities did start in the late 80s when I was at varsity. Interesting time to be in student politics and in the anti-apartheid movement and building a new future for the country. And in that instance, that was really where I saw we had hope in terms of creating a new future. And I think that sentiment has stayed with me. There's always possibility to build different futures, different communities, different organizations. And my path took me into skills development. So I was very involved in the initial stages of working with the new education and training systems, in our new democracy, in building in new innovative programs, and then started working with scenarios, because for me, futures thinking was really important. So led the Dinner King scenarios, multiple stakeholder conversations, always about let's create a new innovative future. Let's look at what's possible. And from those scenarios, that then translated into, but how do we have the right leaders and organizations to actually execute on that and build these new futures? And so then started working with organizational change and leadership development. So I've worked with culture change projects with large organizations and as an academic lecturing and building on future fit leaders. So I call myself a pracademic. So for me, it's really important to be looking at how do we have best practice and really an understanding of building leaders that can work in complexity and create new organizations and new sectors. But on the other hand, let's actually be practical too. So let's make sure that we're able to deliver on that. And that took me to a case of, or a dilemma. Why is it when we say organizations change, that they want inclusion, that they want diversity, but in reality, it's still often siloed. We listen to only a few people. We don't have diversity of thinking. And that took me down the path of what about the unseen diversities? Because we know when people feel that they can engage, that they bring their best ideas, their innovation, their discretionary effort. And so we really want to bring in the diversity of the unseen talent. And that took me down the road of neurodiversity.
Excellent. Yeah. So, and I'm curious to hear about that. But before we go to neurodiversity, I'm just curious about the work you've done, the work you do around culture. Just a few thoughts there. When do people, say after an exco meeting or after some set of results, sort of say, hey, maybe let's bring in Dr. Sarah here, and what do they bring you to do, to what effect? Just on the culture conversation.
So for me, it does start with a realization or a commitment to a new strategic direction with digital transformation and really seeing that we need future fit capacities. So and Manda, it'll be an interesting conversation with your work too. So how often also do we see strategy that says we need to be agile, we need to be collaborative, we need to be innovative, because that's what we need in our strategy, to be adaptive, to be actually fast moving in terms of the tumultuous context and the opportunities that may bring. And then there's a turning in to say, but actually our culture is quite slow, it's quite siloed, we don't have an operating model that supports this strategy. So for me, I've always worked around the people side of change and future direction. So whether maybe I've been called into a bank, for example, that was automating the back-end finance function. And then they're going, but our finance function's not fit for purpose for this automated process. How do we marry people and automation better? And so that means a different capacity, a different culture for that back-end finance function, through to companies like 100-year-old institutions like the South African Reserve Bank or VW South Africa, now Africa, VW Africa, saying similarly, we need to be modernized, we need to be inclusive. How do we actually do that? So for that would be on that side, and then really looking at a change process. Yes, the coaching side. So the coaching side for me, I like to work on systems, I like to work on capacity building, but I also love a little bit of one-on-one to really support the internal identity change. And that's been a large focus of my work, is how do we transition our identity to be more executive, to be more future fit, because it is such an internal journey for each person. And what do we let go of and how do we build that? So coaching really, I think, supports those changes.
Lovely. I've been in environments where coaching was seen as something that gets offered to someone that's not doing well. Say, culture survey or employee engagement survey. And then they realize maybe there's like people issues here, or this person is missing the mark on this thing. And then they go, let's find him a coach, or let's find this person a training program. And I'm just curious, perhaps what you might want to say to our listeners about perhaps who should be seeking out coaching at what time in their career and why they should seek out coaching. And maybe bonus is what might they expect from coaching.
So I'd love to hear your experiences of this, but when performance is a substitute for performance management, I as a coach would say no, because that's not what coaching is. It should not be seen as punitive or something that you have to do to retain your job. I think there's many other issues around that. So for me, coaching could be either individually requested. So an example, an executive coach has just requested, for example, she's transitioning to more a senior role. She's finding her old patterns of leadership are not working. She's also at a midlife age where she's really exploring what's next for her. So she, for example, put out a call for a match for a executive coach that is a midlife woman. So that would be an example of somebody being quite deliberate what they want and where they're going, and her CEO supported that because they want to retain her as talent. Organizations can also have coaching when it is around a future transition or a change, or even showing a commitment for employee engagement. But if the individual does not want it, do not do it. So again, I've often walked away from coaching. You might say I'm foolish, but I've walked away from coaching saying this person is not at a stage where they want to develop and grow. But I have found it to be the most effective in terms of supporting application of learning and being able to actually introduce new micro habits and essentially build a new identity of how am I and who am I being to be effective in this world now. So there's life coaching, business coaching, and different types now, team coaching, and really important to consider.
No,
and I love reverse mentoring too. So where often our senior executives are saying, bring in the Gen Zs, the new generation in our workplace to coach us, because it's also an acknowledgement that our old patterns of thinking do not necessarily match this new world. And I know I learn a lot from my teenage daughter around the lingo and just how the worldview is so different. So I really appreciate that too. Different perspectives and learning being so important.
Sure. And I also coach, and I found myself kind of seeing myself more as a coach. And then I had a season where I didn't have a coach, and not long ago I enrolled a coach to coach me, and it's just been absolutely incredible to just be on the other side and get even this gift of an hour to just be coached. It's just amazing, the effect thereof of that. So yeah, I think just to emphasize again, when you are ready to be coached, I think it's one of the best investments one can make in a career.
Agree.
Yes, sorry, you wanted to talk about this. Your journey led you to this concept of neurodiversity. What I'm curious about is, what is that in plain, simple English?
Yes, so essentially our brains all are different. Like a fingerprint or an iris, we all have a different way of thinking, viewing the world. We know that, but we don't take that thinking further in terms of, so what does that mean if we think differently? So essentially, neurodiversity is essentially saying our neuro wiring is different. Within that spectrum of difference, there is, if you think a long spectrum, how different we all are, there is a section of neurodivergence, which says there's some overlapping traits or behaviors and particular brain wiring that could be clustered under neurodivergent. So neurodivergent thinking includes all the way from dyslexia, autism, ADHD, which we now understand with brain science just how the brain functions differently. So ADHD, for example, seeks dopamine, so it's always looking for novelty, innovation, and the like, whereas autism brain likes to hyperfocus, have detail. It processes sensory environments differently because the brain is so wired and on. It really is able to absorb so much, which is quite extraordinary, actually, versus the dyslexia brain that can't spell and letters are reversed. So just a different way of processing information, sensory environment, and environment. So it's a normal distribution of brain functioning. And 20% of our population falls into the neurodivergent cluster.
20%.
And in fact, it's looking more like 30%. So the numbers are
Almost a
rising.
third.
Yes, it's rising. And the diagnosis is getting better, but what we're also finding is the diagnosis used to be very biased towards boys and men. You know, the stereotypes and this still very sticky stereotypes of the white man or the white boy. You know, if you think of TV series, The Good Doctor, Young Sheldon, kind of, we have this stereotype which is very limited, very limited.
Yes.
In fact, that's a very small portion, but the diagnosis used to only work with picking up a particular presentation of ADHD, for example. ADHD being hyperactive and the naughty boy in class, you know, that's a stereotype. But now the diagnosis is more gender neutral, and we know that girls present and women present differently. So girls might, it's really, so the diagnosis now is going up partly because the tool is less gender biased. So more girls are being recognized as ADHD, and maybe they present as inattentive ADHD, or there's even a combined ADHD. So that's not, it's actually a misnamed phenomena. So it's not attention deficit, it's the attention regulation is different. So you will have, there's great attention, but it tends to be with the ADHD brain on what is interesting and novel and what I'm passionate about. Then I'll give you all my attention. But when I'm bored or I'm dealing with repetition, then my brain gets distracted, right? So now we're seeing a rise in America, for example, on the autism spectrum. 1 in 31 children is being diagnosed, according to the CDC, with autism. And so autism has many levels. So you have high functioning autism, and you have level 3, which may be nonverbal. But the high functioning autism is a super brain. So it can process information, deal with large amounts of data. And you're finding then that more, there's a higher prevalence in some disciplines. So IT, data, security cyber analysts can process data, actuaries, scientists, engineers might be, you know, with more of an inkling to that way of functioning. Critical thinking, problem solving, but also might feel a bit overwhelmed with sensory, might not want to communicate with everybody, you know, the communication processing. So all these behavioral traits. What's also happening, just to add one more thing, so we're understanding a lot more of the nuance and the complexity, and there's dyspraxia and dyscalculia and Tourette syndrome, you know, like, and more people are talking about it. Like all for, you know, Billie Eilish has Tourette syndrome, which she talks about openly. So she can sing beautifully without these sound bites coming out. But when she's in an interview, she might have a tick or say words involuntarily. So that's another form. We find more people like Richard Branson talking about his dyslexia being a superpower, because you don't rely on text, you rely on visual thinking. And in fact, there's about 40% of entrepreneurs are ADHD, because you can see systems, joins, dots, you're inspired by higher risk propensity, creativity, flexibility are natural strengths of that profile of brain. So as more people talk about it, as the diagnosis gets better, what also happens is that neurodivergence is largely genetic. So now the children are being diagnosed at school, and the parents are going, I recognize those traits. Where did that come from? And so there's a surge, and I'm using this term, of midlife women being diagnosed, because now the tools pick them up. So there's a doubling of diagnosis of women, late stage diagnosis. So now what we call it is a spiky profile. So you have great strengths in these different profiles, and then the areas that might be weaker. So I'm late diagnosed ADHD, and now my life makes sense, because I go, oh, no wonder I love being an entrepreneur and an academic and, you know, creating programs and everything. I'm so inspired. I see the world, you know, in a spidergram, you know, way. I can join the dots. I can simplify complexity. But I do forget where I put my phone, and I do forget where I put my pens, and I leave cupboard doors open. It's amazing, because my brain has moved on. It's like object impermanence. So I literally I've opened the cupboard. I've taken out my cups and then I've forgotten because my brain's moved on, right? That I've left the cupboard doors open. So, and that's okay. It's okay, you know. So the more we normalize this, that we open the lid, that people can talk about it, I find that if I say to a room of people, put up your hand, do you know anyone who's neurodivergent? Might be a friend, a child, a nephew, a niece, a cousin, and most people put up their hand. But often it's kept as a quiet family secret, or only you talk to the psychologist, or only you try and medicate it away. It's not a medical deficit that needs to be fixed. It's a natural brain wiring, and if we understand it, we can work to the strengths, like we would with anyone. Work to your strengths.
Excellent. And I think many of us, or some of us, kind of encounter these conversations on ADHD or neurodivergence when the teachers call us to school, and then it's as if it's a case now to be resolved, and
exactly.
It's a big problem, and then when they describe this thing, you're like, oh yeah, I mean, what's wrong with that?
Exactly.
That sounds just about right.
So there's
I'll tell you a brief one about me. So I don't know how I've not been diagnosed, but I just remember I did a silence retreat once, and I was frustrated by how like I'm supposed to be a proper manager and kind of focus and all of these things, and they're just like, you're all over the place. And so at this thing, I met the silence retreat director like for 15 minutes begin each morning, and then she just kind of said, hey, have you ever considered that God made you this way? He made you, it's like, just see, hardwired you with the zeal for life and the passions and all of that stuff, and he's happy that you are like that. And I think for me, that's how I mean, that sort of liberated me to kind of go, I am made this way. I didn't have all the right kind of words, but
absolutely. And when you speak to people, whether they're self-diagnosed or just understanding themselves better, it's so liberating to go, actually, this is who I am, and that's a wonderful thing. And let me work to my strengths. And if I understand it, then I can compensate. Now I've got a place where I put my phone every day so I don't lose it. Not that I do that all the time, or a place where I put my keys, and I still carry around either 50 pence or no pens. But that's fine too. And every year I'm surprised because of executive functioning a bit lower that I must still register my car again, So it's like but I think absolutely. So imagine we could have this, and this comes back to building inclusive communities and organizations where we could really have a place where everybody's recognized for their strengths, where they can bring their best strengths, and with simple accommodations, be it noise cancelling headphones or more flexible work practices, or even, technology assisted support, whether it's diary, calendar management, reminders, etc., can really allow somebody to really thrive. And this for me would be that vision of these reformed organizations and communities where we speak openly, where there's not a stigma or bias, but actually just an embracing of, imagine saying, I've got passion and ideas, and somebody going, no, we don't want that here, It's like,
and
would be missing out.
Make the numbers work.
And we miss out on talent.
Sure. So what I'm curious about is if I now have a team of people, and they all sort of the brain functions in a spectrum, and they show up differently. Where do I start? Maybe I've made up some mind about different members of the team. Maybe I've already stigmatized them. Where to from here? Now that I kind of get this sense that, hey, we're all made different. Our brains function differently, and there's strength in all of these areas.
I would say there's three things to do on different levels. So the one is on an individual level. Let's start there. So mostly you'll find you already have 20% of your staff that are neurodivergent, but they just haven't told you yet because maybe they don't feel safe. Or one individual's disclosed and then they've been supported, and then it remains confidential. So I think the first thing to look at is as an individual. So we coach neurodiversity coaching to say, am I aware? Where do I choose to disclose? What does that mean? What do I want to request for? What are my rights? And what would be suitable to support me in that transition? That neurodivergence counts as a disability in our Employment Equity Act.
I didn't know that.
I know it's such a controversial conversation, but
say more.
Yes, I will. The Employment Equity Amendment Act expanded the definition of disability to include sensory impairment and mental impairment, intellectual impairment, which is more in line with the UN Convention definition, which could include the neurodivergence. So now the target's gone up to 3% for disability inclusion. And so disclosure could be supportive of your organization, setting greater targets, understanding your profile. But if you're not helping, it was a big thing for me when I first had my diagnosis, and I had, these forms always, what's your name, race, age, gender, and then it had, do you have a disability? And I sat there going, do I say yes or no? Because, according to the definition, I do. And I could request accommodations. It's in law, you need to give reasonable accommodations for a disability. So if I'm in a wheelchair, I can request a ramp if I'm neurodivergent. So I was like, so this is interesting. So I toyed with it, and then I thought, well, yes. So I ticked yes. And then I thought, okay. Let's see what happens. And the sky didn't fall in and nothing happened. But for some individuals, it's fine if you also don't want to disclose.
To inquire and to see what support you might need?
Not for this particular form, but, there may be other situations. But it was interesting just from an individual point of view. Also, from a company point of view, with reasonable accommodations, you could have greater engagement. So also, why are we sitting in South Africa? Is it 70% of our people are disengaged? They don't feel safe. They're not happy. So really, I think it's from a team management point of view to your question, do I really have an environment in my team where people feel included, seen, recognized? Do I ask for their ideas? Do I have an environment and a culture where we have that rigorous debate, where we have engagement, where I actually allow people to bring their best selves to work? And that is for a manager to consider, because we know that you'll get better results if you have that. And that then would include, how do you create a safe environment to build a team that understands the neurodivergence, but also where it could be a conversation on what strengths do we have in our team and how do we best play off those. And we would do that anywhere, right? When you look at a team, how do you base it on strengths? So I'll give you a simple example, but I see you have a question.
No, go with example.
So in an insurance company, just by way of example, the one team was looking at this exact conversation, and then their open plan, and you have to book your desk. So now, let's say you are on the autism spectrum, high functioning. There's a high degree. You really are well respected. You're a specialist in the organization, and you're on the spectrum, high functioning. But you don't have necessarily your natural strength is not executive functioning or emotional regulation. In other words, you don't necessarily book the desk. So then you get the desk, which is next to the opening door and the photocopier and the stationery cupboard. So the sensory overwhelm is too much. So then you say, you maybe lose your tempo. You say, I need to work from home more. This environment's not working for me. But you know what? How simple is it to solve it if you're aware of it? Because then the manager could say, what? Let's just earmark one desk for this person. We discuss it with the team, why it's happening, and then you're going to see this person more in the office. There'll be a better tone or environment. Simple. It's not, I don't mean to simplify it, but it's not,
That is such a good example. That is such a good example. Because of how you're wired, you're not likely going to also book yourself a desk on time, etc. And then it's almost like this thing just loops.
Exactly.
in effect.
Yeah.
It's a
And really,
virtual.
yeah.
Yeah.
And really I know in the autism space, they always say if you've met somebody with autism, you met one person with autism, because every case is different. Companies have started introducing neurodiversity projects. So SAP has got an Autism at Work program. Ernst & Young has got 23 neurodiversity centers of excellence around the world and growing. Wells Fargo has got a neurodiversity employee resource group, plus other support. There's Deloitte's, SAP, I mentioned SAP, IBM, Hewlett-Packard. So these institutions are really beginning to recognize that 20% of their talent is not necessarily engaged, and there's great value to be had through engaging this amazing superpower brain on some respects. So the return on investment has shown higher retention, greater innovation, productivity, and return in terms of that. But those are projects, right, where you bring those people together. I think really the next phase is to build neuroinclusive companies, so where they really have policies to include all diversities.
Before we go to the next stage, if I'm listening and I'm a leader of a company, and I go, hey, could we also have a project like that in our organization? What might that look like? Where do I go? Do I call Dr. Sarah to help me structure this? What happened?
Yeah, so that's why I founded STIM with some colleagues to actually look at how do we build this in practice in the global south. So I think we also need to understand that we know we're not UK and America where a lot of this work is happening, but actually in our context. So that means looking at what are our talent attraction and retention policies in terms of even how we select people, because we may be missing out on talent. For example, why do we have written tests if your population may be dyslexic? And is writing really important for that job? Because given our computers these days, I mean, I spell terribly, but it always autocorrects. Not always right, but at least you check autocorrect, right? So are we missing out on talent? And if we really want to bring in to particular disciplines, then we need to check that we're not missing people because of just using old styled recruitment and attraction. For example, so we look at what do we want, we look at how do we onboard, what reasonable accommodations do we have in terms of our policies and procedures, and then do we meet the neuroinclusive sort of stamp of approval in terms of some of the best practice we can draw on. And then very important is to train your human capital team and your manager teams on how to work with, to your very question, how do managers do this in terms of a neuro-affirming way? And they would need some capacity building because it's a new conversation for us in this continent. We're lagging in terms of some of these conversations, and I'll come to some other areas we're lagging in as well. So very much part of your disability inclusion, but more so your broader talent inclusion and policy and plans.
Sure. And I wonder, just thinking now about this example we spoke about, when might someone consider perhaps the performance I am seeing might actually be a function of this individual is not included, and less so that they're not applying themselves, or they don't care, or they're not competent. I wonder how much we are right at that.
I can give you two examples there, and I think it starts with awareness. I think we can't just do non-biased training. We need to do awareness around neurodivergence training. And that would be certainly a starting point. But to give you an example, if we're not aware of it, we might miss it. Like, this person's just being rude. Why aren't they looking me in the eye? When it actually is when you look at, there's some really interesting images of the neurodivergent brain looking at a photograph, and how much it picks up is very different from the so-called neurotypical brain, which focuses on one thing in the photo, which is really interesting. And we don't use that term because it creates boundaries. But now to your question of one example of, there was an unaware manager with a neurodivergent person in the team and spoke to human capital, said, I want to put on a performance improvement process that must be out. They are showing insubordination and not delivering on time. And the human capital person said, well, I think they're neurodivergent, and managed to have a safe conversation to say, can we support their diagnosis? As part of our employee assistance program, our well-being program, the person was diagnosed neurodivergent, and this manager happened to be leaving, and they happened to, it was just timing, got a different manager in that was more understanding of neurodivergence. Guess what? This person is the top performer in the team.
Oh, stunning.
And isn't that just, don't we see that all the time? When you have a good manager that respects and manages individuals, they can thrive. That's a live example. Another example I found quite amusing. So I was working with some coaches that were working in a hedge fund company. And they said, why they called me in to help the coaches build their capacity in coaching neurodivergence, is they said, it's not disclosed, but we know because of the profile of the brain and the behavioral traits, there's high neurodivergence here. Super analytical, critical thinking, but not good social interaction skills, okay, and not good time management because of, as I said, the spiky profile. So I can hyper-focus as an expert, I can deal with critical thinking, I can churn out best specialist work you need as a hedge fund manager, hugely profitable, but I'm a little bit socially awkward and I'm not good at my time management, for example, because I've worked through the night and now I've, so that the coaches were aware of it and they were working with them. The human capital team was not aware of neurodivergence. And they said to these hedge fund managers, can you imagine in London, successful hedge fund manager, and the human capital team said there's something in our culture that we are late for meetings and we're not respecting deadlines. And I think that you need a time management course. Can you imagine how those people would have reacted to being told you need a time management course? Complete mismatch. So your point is really valid that we need to start with awareness and then have skills to actually to work with it, because it's there. And the potential is growing. The next generation is self-identifying in many ways, much more so than certainly my generation or even millennials. And so there's a lot of self-diagnosis. In fact, not so funny, but at university and matric levels in South Africa, they were running out of, there is medication you can take as an option to support the non-stimulant or stimulant medication to support focus. And there was a black market selling that during matric time or exam time at universities, so ran out of the medication because the new generation is aware, if I take this, I can super focus for 36 hours, cram my studying in and pass my exam.
They ran out in the black market.
Of a particular kind of medication for ADHD. So...
No, thank you for sharing those examples, and I think I think if there's someone who leads a team, I think the importance of just being aware and potentially not railroading someone's career and putting families into danger just because of lack of awareness. I think that's.
And I want to add another element on the spectrum. If you look from a company perspective, your clients, there'll be 20% that are neurodivergent.
Sure.
So how are you adapting your products and your services to this untapped market? How are you looking at how you communicate? Even look at your website. Is there any dyslexia-friendly text or voiceovers, or what about, again, offering, and we should be thinking of this in our delivery, in all our institutions on how we deliver. We're still the old-fashioned, here's some readings, look at the slides, as a simple example. And think of, I'll give you an example too. In the tourism industry in Europe and UK, they're recognizing that neurodivergent profile prefers a quieter, lower lighting, environment, but still want to go to public tourism attractions like museums or exhibitions, etc. So they've begun to market certain times of the day. There'll be dimmer lighting, softer music, and you can come along then. How clever, because now you're attracting a market to your downtime that's normally quieter. And of course, even more than the neurodivergents would want to go. I would, anyway, other people would want to go in a quieter time and not be overwhelmed by neon lights and flashing lights and blaring music, like malls, etc. So there's so many opportunities in this. Yeah.
Oh, excellent. But interrupted you. You were saying there's sort of the awareness and the projects, and then there's a next level now.
Yeah, and some companies are beginning to look quite proactively at that. So their disability inclusion of their products and services, and recognizing that it's, again, with simple adjustments, even in their advertisements, are becoming much more conscious of what role models they are depicting, etc. And this is an opportunity both internally for your current staff, for your future talent, as well as for your customers in your markets. So I definitely just start with awareness, and then to consider on your maturity, your neuroinclusion maturity spectrum. Where are we? Where do we want to be?
So talking about awareness, in the coaching space, you've got a ton of these assessments: insights, the discovery, gap, strength, enneagram. Do we have something like that kind of brings in just maybe some first level of awareness and conversation in this space?
So mostly it's self-selected, and there are many quite valid tools you can take online yourself for self-diagnosis tools. But if you want to be counted in the disability space, you do need to be signed off by a psychologist or neuropsychologist that you've met the DSM criteria, because it falls under the DSM criteria, and there's certain categories, and it becomes a little bit more technical. My bugbear and my mission, Manda, is to support neuroinclusion to be accessible and scalable and affordable across our continent. So I'm partnering with people that are looking at online platforms, at more of an African network of support and awareness raising, because also culturally there's bigger stigma, I think, that we live with in our communities. So this, for me, even the global south is lagging, and I certainly feel quite a strong drive to support your question. And you can't force a diagnosis, you can't insist on disclosure. It still is voluntary from the first person, from the individual's perspective. Yeah.
So love your mission, and I just wonder if some of our listeners listening to us today, maybe they want to contribute towards the mission for our continent. What could be the next 1 or 2, 3 things they do after listening to our podcast?
I would say you really raise your own awareness, but you could also contact me or join our mailing list. We often host events even for parents of neurodivergent adults, for example. We're also looking at a conference next year and various programs, but in terms of just even a 2-hour awareness session with your managers or your human capital team can go a long way just to raising curiosity and interest. So I would suggest making contact and looking at how to set that up as part of your broader program going forward. And then there's some choices that could be made.
And how do we reach you? I not reach you.
So as I say, I've got the Gibbs hat on. I've also got the stimm hat on from the company I started. So Sarah at stimm, stimm.co.za, Sarah at stimm.co.za, or Babb, S at gibbs.co.za, or 082 900 3782. And I'm happy to just discuss what might be a good move for you.
Excellent. So we'll put all that detail on the show notes as well, so that people can reach out to you. Maybe a final thought on leadership and inclusion as a parting shot for our time together.
We're really all seeking places where we can belong and thrive. And this is also almost a good opening conversation about what are those strengths, those hidden diversities, those unseen diversities that we could really bring to the workplace and to our lives. So I really encourage people to just take the first step, openly normalize conversations for ourselves and our families.
Lovely. Maybe one more thing will be a book, perhaps, or a website to recommend where one can go.
So there's I'm busy working on books and research and articles, but there isn't one book, there are many. But if you want just a general start, I quite like following Dr. Neff. Megan Neff, if you look her up, she's got good information graphics, which gives you a good picture of some of the definitions, and there are many links that come from there as a starting point.
Excellent. Dr. Sarah, it's been an honor, and thank you so much for your work and the insights you shared for our first podcast and the emphasis on first.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you to you and the team. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Lovely. Have a great one. Super. Dr. Sarah.
Yeah, thank you. That was so fun, huh?